Hi everyone, Stephen here, and welcome to this very special Mother's Day episode of You Are Admirable. This is episode number 14 with my mom, Elizabeth Harris. Not only is she the best mom in the world, but she's also a 2-time cancer survivor, a former business owner, a philanthropist, and much more. I feel so privileged to be able to bring this interview to you through the nomination of my grandfather. So let's just jump right into it. You do a lot of different things. You've been in the financial services industry for over 35 years. You are a weightlifter.
Yes.
You're a hobby chef. You do all kinds of other hobbies, collections, kayaking. Of all of the things that you do, what is your favorite?
Being a mom. That's my best thing.
That's your favorite thing, being a mother?
Yes.
What about being a mother?
Well, I think that it's certainly the highest human calling, parenthood, and not just moms, but dads too, and just doing the best you can for your kids and just watching them grow into amazing people. And then we've also had the opportunity to partially parent a whole bunch of what I call bonus kids. So I think, and really, every one of you, every single one of you has done well, gotten a good education. All of you have graduated from college. All of you, with one exception, are gainfully employed.
Thanks.
Yeah. Which doesn't diminish your success in any way. But yes, I'm very proud, and some of the kids and the bonus kids have gone on to marry wonderful people who are now also our bonus kids and who have families of their own. I think, being a small part of you guys' lives, because we only have you really until you grow up, for you and Dave, and for the bonus kids, we've had them here and there and for various periods of time. But being a part of that, I think, has been the best thing that we've ever contributed.
Why do you think that you've become such an inviting family, I suppose, to take in kids or people when they're in need and offer them a place to stay and all that good stuff?
I actually think that you and Dave are a huge part of that, or have been. The fact that everyone we've taken in has considered one or both of you a role model in one way or the other. In other words, because you and Dave are the way you are, they trust that we'll take care of them. So that's been huge. It's created a village for people who have needed us from time to time and needed us desperately. Several often say, if it weren't for you guys, we don't know what would have happened. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely admired in both you and Dad the willingness to take people in, to put them up. We've always grown up knowing that if somebody comes to visit, they're going to be staying with us and we're going to take care of them for that time.
Correct.
I think that also transitions into hosting parties, which is something you love to do. You love to cook and have people over and feed everyone. Where does that come from? Why is that something that is so prevalent for you as a person?
That is a really good question. I think that comes from my maternal grandmother, who was very much like that. Unfortunately, she really was, she had a horrible childhood herself, and her early life read like a horror film, actually. And I've written her story as I know it, so that's available for you when you're interested. But the only way she could really demonstrate her love and affection for her family was through food. And that, if that was her sole medium, then I picked it up. And I think it was probably augmented by the fact that that she never taught my mom to cook or let my mom help her in the kitchen. She was very controlling about that, and she believed that that my mother would get an excellent education and marry a wealthy man and have servants to do those things. So between those two things, my mother was a very nervous and tentative chef. So I kind of started cooking for our little family in self-defense when I was about 14. But having my grandma as that role model in the kitchen, because she certainly let me join her, and we had wonderful times together. So we had good times. It was her way to display affection, and people always had a great time. I mean, it was just, she put on a feat, nobody died, and everybody had a good time. So, that must have made, a real strong impression.
Yeah. You mentioned that your mom was kind of brought up to be a housewife, and you mentioned in your bio, too, that she was very insecure.
Yeah.
Why do you think that was?
Oh, because she was, browbeaten almost to death by her mother, who expected perfection. Yeah. Not that, that my grandma did not love her. She did. But she loved her in a very dysfunctional way. So, my grandma destroyed all three children psychologically. It was tragic, really. And all she wanted was the best for them in their new country. But, man, she went about it strangely. And they suffered. They suffered. There was no warmth. There was no affection. There was constant criticism and bullying. It was very difficult for them. My grandfather was the complete opposite, just kind, patient, tolerant. So the kids loved him, and he was really kind of their refuge. So they weren't completely at the mercy of their relentless and uncompromising mother, but it still was a hard environment to grow up in. And my grandparents fought constantly. Just constantly. The conflict and dissension in a family. I mean, you remember the time that Dad and I would yell at each other. It was very, very disconcerting to kids. And this went on all the time in their household. So it was tough.
So do you think you went through anger management?
I did.
Do you think that had something to do with your mother's insecurity and the relationship of your grandparents? Also, what was that whole experience like for you going through anger management therapy?
Oh, well, the answer to the first part of the question is no. The anger problem came from my father.
Okay.
And I, as close as we are today, he was a tough guy to grow up with, because he was also very strict and and he had high expectations. The way he was not like my grandmother was that he was very warm and loving. So most of the time we got along beautifully, but when he got mad, whether at us or at something else, I mean, he blew like a volcano. I mean, he really did not have control over his temper most of his life. Now, as he got older and after my mother passed away, he mellowed out a lot. So he's not that way now, but I remember him picking up, I think it was an attorney, and literally throwing him out of our house. Well, and there's a story. When I was born, I was not lactose intolerant. I think I was casein intolerant. And in those days, I mean, this goes to show you how the world has changed. It was considered peasant-like for young mothers to nurse their infants. So my mother was not allowed to nurse. They bound her up and made sure I couldn't get her milk. Well, what happens if you're allergic to cow's milk? This is dire. And my father was so angry, probably misplaced, but he took the attending physician, who would have probably been his superior at the time. And the story has it that he took him by his necktie and he put him against the wall and he said, "If that baby dies, you die." He did. And that guy found, called the Borden Company, they had been testing something called Mulsoy, a soy-based milk substitute for babies like me. And they shipped a case right out. And I survived. And actually outgrew the milk allergy. Love milk now. But there were some tense moments there. So it's Dad who had the temper.
Fair enough.
And as you know, I come by it honestly.
Yeah. And what was your experience going through anger management? Do you want to know my experience or my regret or both? Both.
Okay. The experience was outstanding. I found a wonderful counselor here in town, a lady about my age who had a great deal of experience in this area. And what she helped me do is first identify the triggers, what set me off. And I don't think Grandpa ever understood what set him off, but I had to learn that. And then, once you know what sets you off, you can identify it when it comes along. Then there is a process by which you think about it. You say, uh-oh, trigger. And then you take a minute and you think about how you're going to respond to it. And that was enormously empowering. There aren't even words to describe what that did for my life, for my peace of mind. As I said in my little philosophy statement, do no harm. It took me 58 years to learn how not to hurt people's feelings, when I got really angry. I don't run around hurting people's feelings. I think I'm a pretty nice person in general, but I just go off and say something that I regretted later. And now I do that a whole lot less. And all my relationships improved, with you guys, with your dad, with people who I was legitimately angry with, but learned how to control the response. And I guess my regret is that I didn't do it 30 years earlier. If I only knew then what I know now, I would have saved a whole lot of people, myself first and foremost, a great deal of unhappiness and aggravation.
Yeah, definitely. What would you say is the thing you admire most about yourself, and what do you admire least about yourself?
Certainly the temper, was my Achilles heel. What I admire most, what I admire most maybe is that, at least at this stage of my life, I'm not afraid of anything anymore. It can't scare me. But I think throughout my life, I always tried to show up and do something good. Yeah. The other thing that surprised me about myself is that I am not a particularly creative or an imaginative person, and yet, certainly professionally, we were able to do some absolutely unique things that helped a lot of people over the years. And those things, I mean, they just didn't come in a dream. I mean, they were born of pretty urgent necessity to continue to make a living or continue to offer services that people needed when they didn't have enough power and leverage to access those things on their own. So it wasn't some kind of, brilliant insight. It was just basically grinding through what we needed to do and then figuring out a way to do that. And when I say that, Steve, I would say maybe that's my strong suit. To see a problem and say, and just be unwilling to admit defeat. So whether it's my stage 4 cancer patients and what all went on there to just to get this huge political snowball rolling for them, or to make sure that my gentle giant draft horses have renewable sources of revenue, or that our friend Lisa has solar panels, or I mean, all of this started with, oh, here's a problem. Now how do we go about fixing it? And because nothing scares me when people go, oh, you can't do this, I go, hell, you say. Sure I can.
Sure you can. You've got Jurgen and Steven and
yeah, that's right.
else to do things for you.
That's right. That's right. I got my hired guns, and all I have to do is say, "Hey, you guys,
Yeah.
this is where we're going with this."
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's where my mind went right away when you said your fearlessness because of the surviving cancer 2 times.
Correct.
What do you think is the biggest lesson that you took from your bouts fighting cancer?
Well, number one, of course, is to be inordinately grateful for every day. That is huge, and there's not a day that goes by that I'm not grateful that I live, to see another one, and to see the things that have happened to you guys. When I was, this is still typical today, even though my experience goes back almost 30 years. But when I was diagnosed the first time with the primary tumor, everybody in the medical community is just after it, because the prognosis for success is huge. Most women and a few men who get breast cancer the first time recover and live normal lives. So, it sounds terrible, but the medical community thinks they're worth treating. And they're worth treating aggressively, and chances are they're going to be okay. Now, when you come back the second time, that changes entirely. You know, I visited with doctors from Billings to Seattle. I visited 5 doctors, and all of them told me to go home and die. And that's not so different from what happens today with the majority of patients whose cancer has spread. And it's very scary when it happens to you, of course. I mean, it's terrifying. But it's tragic that almost 30 years later, the mindset hasn't changed all that much. And I'm not saying that all doctors and medical teams are still like that. There's some who will go the distance with patients. But frankly, my experience is, and it's only empirical, I haven't done any clinical or scientific research, but the majority of doctors, you know, really write those patients off. So, you know, after my diagnosis of metastatic breast disease and going through that a year of treatment, which I don't know how well you remember that, you were 8, but it was a grueling year, and miraculously I started to recover. I began volunteering for the American Cancer Society, being a Reach to Recovery volunteer, which meant in those days, as it does now to a large extent, visiting with cancer patients either in person or on the phone. So I was doing that all those years from 1996 until I retired 2 years ago. Well, a year ago, August, the Reach to Recovery Volunteer Dispatch Center in Austin, Texas, realized that I was one of, if not the only, long-term survivor of stage 4 breast cancer who was a volunteer. And I started getting all the calls. I mean, all the calls from all over the country. And from my perspective, that's fine. Anytime I can help, that's great. But I'm hearing the experiences of these ladies, and oftentimes well, I won't say that yet. What I've noticed is the few ladies I've talked with whose medical team, and their oncologists in particular, hasn't given up on them, has gone the distance with them, have actually recovered and done really well, you know, even in the face of some very tough challenges. Those without that kind of help struggle and have a much poorer probability of recovery. So with that frustration in mind, I can't change the whole medical community by myself, but my dispatcher, who's a marvelous young woman, she's your age, and has become a dear friend, put me in touch with someone in the Montana American Cancer Society Political Action Committee, and they were working on legislation that would help those critically ill patients, not just cancer patients, not just breast cancer patients, and not just all cancer patients, but people with heart disease and people with acute diabetes and lung disease and all kinds of people who are struggling with critical life-threatening illnesses, and trying to advance and expand appropriate care for these people who Many medical teams just don't have the resources to treat or don't really understand how to give these people the care and the hope that they need to fight. So that kind of started me on a whole different trajectory.
Yeah.
So after being completely apolitical and not really liking anything about politics, I started being a volunteer lobbyist for that particular purpose. And we got the law passed, and then they invited me to be on the advisory council. So going forward, we will be able to build a website with resources for both patients and physicians and medical teams, and do some outreach. And in Montana, I didn't know this, but of course, much of Montana we know is rural, but some of Montana is frontier, which is more rural than rural, and some of it is wilderness. So, and those people get sick, and they need some help. And if they have access to a computer, or somebody who has access to a computer or a phone that serves as their computer, then they will very shortly be able to get some resources and some help. So that's kind of important. And as a result of that, I learned that the legislative process in this country has, of course, a long and venerable tradition. It's not always pleasant or clean, but it exists so that people are served, by those they elect to make these laws. And I learned that those people, our legislators, need help. Mostly they need information. They need information about the issue, of course, and they need it in a very concise, digestible format. And they also need to know that what you're asking them to do is of value and importance to their constituents. So being part of that process is really important to getting good laws passed by legislators, most of whom want to do the right thing. And that's regardless of political party. But then, for those legislators who have agendas unrelated to their constituents' well-being, and that does happen, of course, those are people who you've got to trade out. And that also is an education process. So, I've kind of become involved in that as well. Let's get rid of people who really don't care about us in favor of people who are going to do their best and work hard for the people of this state. And this state is really all, we can influence, really. Mm-hmm. Obviously, everybody should vote at all levels, all elections that pertain to them, but truly, it's at the local level where you can see progress.
Well, you're really accomplishing a lot in those areas, in those fields. What would you say in your entire life is your most, which accomplishment are you most proud of? You guys, for sure. I mean, hands down, you and Dave. That's it. I mean, just, being your family has been my greatest joy. Absolutely. I feel the same way.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
No, I mean, when you guys were born, your dad and I had this philosophy, and it was, we would like to help raise you into people we would enjoy being with, people we enjoy hanging out with. And that happened. I mean, that happened. And you were enjoyable to hang out with from the time you were infants. I mean, it's always been a lot of fun. So that's, definitely, that's absolutely been it. I think now the cancer work drives me, you could kind of tell. And there's a lot to be done to make sure that good things happen. And truly, tying this whole cancer thing up, even though medical teams have been slow to take up the cause of these critically ill patients, medical research hasn't stood still. From the time that I was diagnosed the second time in 1995, when the survival rate was 1 or 2%, it is now more than 22%. Well, okay, that means that 78% of the people who have cancer, as I did, do not survive for 5 years or longer. But it means that 1,000% more survive 5 years or longer than did in 1995. So it's worth fighting for. The more people who recover and live longer periods of time with good quality of life, that changes the way medical students are taught and the way practices handle these critically ill patients. So, that's my big deal. Now, I think besides being mom, and before I got to do this work as a retiree, I think the best thing that your dad and I did, as I mentioned earlier, was help people to construct a secure and successful retirement plan for themselves and for their families. And we did that for thousands of people over, the almost 40 years that we were in business. And of course, I was the front man for that. And your dad made sure that those retirement plans worked properly, that people's money was their money and was where it was supposed to be, and that all the federal rules were followed, so the plans themselves were sustainable for the people's working lives. So we watched people, because it was our working lives and it was their working lives. So we watched a lot of people retire successfully, and people who said, "Gosh, if we hadn't met you guys, this might not have happened." Well, we don't know, but it's nice to hear.
Right.
It's nice to hear, and when you work with people year after year after year, you can see that happening, and they can see it happening. And a lot of those people, as you know, have become personal friends. They're just some wonderful folks. And had we not done a couple of those very unusual things out of necessity, there would have been many fewer people, especially in Montana, because most businesses are small, and people did not and don't in many cases have access to some economies of scale. The old saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, but a lot of that is just pure economic reality. Many large institutions just can't serve unprofitable customers. And what we did, of course, was aggregate all these little tiny customers who were unprofitable for the investment industry and make them a force to be reckoned with. We could bargain and we could get incredible concessions in the pricing of these wonderful and the best investments out there. So concessions in pricing and access, again, to some of the best investments out there. And this was just little people, not little people, but people in tiny organizations who just would never be able to make this kind of progress, in this environment without, what we all put together for all of us, as necessity. And I think the other thing professionally that I'm proud of was the adult education I did for the departments of transportation. That was something that was close to my heart, and just pure wonderful karma, finding my friend Barbara Martin, who was the they have a name for it, but it's department head for education at the Montana Department of Transportation back in 2002. But she had the same vision. She wanted to have employees be financially literate, and she was able to fund that project. And we did it for 9 years, and it ended up being expanded to the Wyoming and North Dakota Department of Transportation employees as well. So we touched a lot of folks in those years, and just teaching them basic things like, how do you put a budget together, whether you have a computer or just a ledger book? How do you just set goals and make sure that you achieve those goals for yourself and your family, and how to be savvy about all the complicated things there are around today, like making large purchases, homes and cars, and getting credit cards, and navigating the financial industry that really kind of has evolved to obfuscate what they're doing to us and be less than transparent in a plain language, understandable way. Legally, there are all kinds of laws that says you have to tell people this, that, and the other thing. Well, yes, you can say it on a page with, number 30 font or whatever, but it doesn't mean that people will read it or understand it. So doing that, I think, helped a lot of people get where they needed to go, and just to know where to find information.
Yeah. Who'd you say, other than your parents, has been the biggest influence on your life?
So many people have helped us along the way. If you just shut up and listen, most people want to help. And we benefited from their experience over the years. But I got to say, the people we learned the most from, again, was you guys. I mean, parenting is its own job, it's its own world, and you learn so much as your kids grow and do what they do. I mean, just get educated and get socialized and grow physically and do what you guys do. So probably, yeah. I mean, other than my folks, your dad is really, really sharp. Mm-hmm. And he taught me to read everything, like everything that flies by, which helps. It helps you understand about any number of things in life, from history to what's going on in your environment to what's happening in the world socioeconomically and scientifically, certainly, those kinds of things. He has really nurtured my my love of learning. I mean, I always liked learning, and I always liked discussing ideas, but and that he's not as good at. He's not a big talker, but he's a big reader, you know. So I've gotten a lot on that side, but I usually have to find other people to talk with about, you know, some of those important concepts.
As far as kids are concerned,
Yes.
you as a kid went to Disneyland 2+ times per year for nearly 20 years.
I know it's coming.
up until you were a senior in college.
Yeah.
Why didn't your kids ever go to Disneyland?
Okay, here is the absolute truth, Steve. We couldn't afford to take you. That's the honest to gospel truth. And that would not have changed until fairly recently. So I'm sorry about that. But you got to remember, you and Dave, and here's one of the you know, great, I know I'm using the word joy a lot, but one of the great joys in our life was watching you guys travel. Because both of you have been to, you know, 2 handfuls, at least maybe 3 handfuls more places than we have been. I mean, you've been able to see the world. And by the way, as much as I love Disneyland, the places you've seen, Disneyland really pales by comparison. But yes, it would have been fun when you were little guys, but we lived here. You know, we lived in Washington, and then we lived here, and that was a very long, costly trip. And the other problem is, it is not just money in isolation, but because we were self-employed, when we were gone, we were not earning money. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just a matter of saving the dough and getting your 2 weeks of paid vacation. We didn't have that luxury. So as you recall, other than our trip to Germany in 1991, which we were looking under seat cushions, wow, you know, for that money. But other than that, we never took fancy vacations. And what do? We camped and we hiked, and you know, we went with your paternal grandparents, may they rest in peace. But and I have to, back to the people who influenced me, I would have to count them as well. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, you know, your dad's people, Nanny and Pop, were amazing resources for us, and they just helped us out so much. And not because they had vast wealth. Obviously they didn't, but they certainly had. They were a wellspring of important experience and information, and man, talk about people who showed up and did something good. You know, that was them. So, you know, big influence from them.
What's something about you that not many people would know?
Something about me that most people would not know. Oh, well, I think now, based on my activities of the last several years, I think most people would be surprised. Well, I think there are two things. You know, my face outside the family, when I started to go to anger management, most people just could not believe it. Oh, you're so nice. Well, I'm nice until I'm not, you know. So that actually did surprise people who I told. I think the other thing that would surprise people is that I spent my entire lifetime until the last few years afraid of horses.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons I started taking lessons, because of course when Dave and Julie married, Julie was the single parent of Buck, my grand horse, who your father will not acknowledge. But that's how I consider him. And I realized that I probably should learn to be safe around horses, not just for myself, but do things that make the horses feel safe too, because they are, they're wonderful creatures, but they're very different than we are in how they think about things and what makes them comfortable and happy and safe. So,
what do you think has been a failure in your life, or what has been the biggest failure in your life?
The biggest one was waiting till I was 58 to do the anger management. I mean, that was a tragic mistake. I just wish I could have thought that through a long time ago. Yeah. And because of that, I don't want that to sound, I keep saying it over and over again, but remember, I have a lot of guilt about, you guys seeing me, blow my top for no good reason, not really, and making you uncomfortable and yelling at you from time to time. Thankfully it wasn't all the time like my grandparents, but it just, when it happened, it just made me feel so bad and so guilty, and I just didn't know when it was going to overtake me. I mean, I would just blow like my father did, and that, that really has caused me a lot of distress over the years. So that's probably the worst thing. I always had this unrequited desire to get my PhD in something. Oh. And now, I don't think I'm going to do that. So, I mean, to my younger self, that would have been a failing. If my younger self were here today, it would say, why don't you get your PhD? And I go, I let that one slip away.
Yeah. Grandpa really admired, Grandpa's the one who nominated you, of course, for this.
Yes.
And he admires all of the things that you do, a lot of which we talked about. Advocacy for cancer patients, lobbying for better care, all of those things that you do. And one of the things that he wanted to know is if you'd like to settle down. So you kind of knew the answer to that, but what do you feel?
My, raising you guys, absolutely number one, providing support to the bonus kids. You were 1A, that was 1B. My professional life, believe it or not, Steve, that was the most fun I had with my clothes on. I loved what I did, and I love my interaction with people and helping them get where they needed to go financially. That was absolutely huge. But when my health started to fail, one day I was all in, and the next day I was out. And fortunately, Anton found me and is better than I ever dreamed of being. So having him take over was a blessing beyond my ability to express it. So I was running hard throughout my younger years. And then, when I retired, I thought, well, I have my little bucket list, and I'm gonna redo the cookbook, and we're gonna do some remodeling here, and we're gonna take a few trips around the state mostly, and maybe some cross country stuff. We love history and museums and such. So I had those little things in my mind that I wanted to do. This other stuff found me. the American Cancer Society a year ago. The draft horses, that was crazy. I saw this little notice in the paper that there were rescue horses, these gigantic rescue horses in Livingston, and they were having an open house. Well, I go out there and just fall in love and realize that the founder is just doing the work of 5 people, and she needs more regular renewable sources of revenue. Well, see, there's my strong suit. I go, we need more regular revenue. How are we going to do that? So, I start kind of brainstorming, and one of these, you can't do this. I got them hooked up with Give Big Gallatin. And originally, they're not in Gallatin County, or the facility is not. But I talked them into adding this charity because they do have a legitimate office in Bozeman in Gallatin County. And as it turned out, of course, they had other organizations with multiple locations throughout the state. As long as they had a location here in Gallatin County, they would in fact be eligible, but it had to go before the board, and there was, some convincing that had to go on. But it was kind of stuff like that, where they say, oh no, you can't do this. Well, wait, we have a way around this. So that kind of found me, and that's been fun. And we've done a couple of other things. One of the other things was I said, well, how about Murdoch's, the Ranch and Home store? Oh, she says, the director says they're very good to us, and I really don't want to bother them. I said, no, you don't understand. If you do an event for them, that helps them. Just let's approach it that way. What can we do for you guys? And now we're going to be doing those events twice a year, and Murdoch's buys all the food for the barbecue, and our job as volunteers is to put the barbecue on, and we get the proceeds. But it's a huge business day for them.
Are you ready for your last question, Mom?
I am.
Who's somebody who's a part of your life, not your parents or your significant other, who you admire? What do you admire about them, and what's 1 or 2 questions that you would ask them?
I have been thinking about this, and I thought about so many people who would qualify, but the person I'd actually like to nominate is Scott Leese.
Oh, nice.
And the reason is, he is probably the finest human being I have ever known. He is just good to the core. He is kind, embracing of everyone. He doesn't seem to have a mean, angry, prejudiced bone in his body. But what he has done, he's had one job. Well, there were those 3 months that he went to Seattle, but in his life, since he was 16, he's had one job, and he's now 59. He has worked for Pepsi all those years. And in that capacity, not only has he brought soft drinks to Montana, to Western Montana, which I know some may not feel as big an accomplishment as others. In the process of doing that, he is probably the most giving and charitable individual, both personally, giving of his time and energy for a myriad of good causes. Virtually everyone who needs something in our area, Scott has donated to, either personally or through his ability to leverage his control over Pepsi products to help these organizations. I just don't know one that has not been touched by him, and people who have not been touched by him. And you know, we're talking about things from the food bank to the Worthy Student Scholarship to the my draft horses. I mean, there is not an organization in this community that hasn't been helped by his efforts. So I think, and the other thing is, he has never known an enemy. There's no one who doesn't like him. So
That you know
of. That I know of, yeah. But you know, when you think about that, that is so rare.
Yeah.
To be a person literally without enemies, without contention, who has only spread goodness and caring and helping throughout the community for the better part of half a century, and he's not even 60 years old. I mean, he is a remarkable individual.
What 1 or 2 questions would you ask him?
How does he do it? How are you so nice all the time? Don't you ever get mad at anything? And no, he's normal. I mean, there's some things that frustrate him or aggravate him, but you know, I think that's probably the main question. It's just, how do you maintain your perspective in the face of things that may anger you or frustrate you? Because he just seems to have more equanimity than anyone I have ever known.
Yeah. Great nomination.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Mom, thank you so much for sitting down with me, for raising me and David, for doing everything that you do, for helping so many other people.
Wow.
And I love you.
I love you too. It has been an honor. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks for checking out episode number 14 of You Are Admirable with my mom, Elizabeth Bess Harris. In case you haven't heard, this project is now supportable through Patreon. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/youareadmirable. I'd like to give out a huge thanks to everyone who has pledged their support already, and especially to my honorable patrons for this episode, one of whom is my mom. Thanks, Mom. And the other 2 are my good friends Hung Nguyen Hilfiger and Yuri Noel Nelson. Hung, I'm glad we never killed each other. I'm so glad that we're always there to support one another, and thank you so much. I've got nothing but love for you and your entire family. Happy Mother's Day. And to Yuri, I miss you, man. I love you. I hope you kill it in kite surfing, and thank you for all of your support over the years. Of course, you can like, share, and subscribe to support the project as well. And remember, you are admirable. See you next time. And other shit.
Yes. We're not actually doing the interview in German, are we?
We could do this interview in German. Being a patron, would you consider? No. Excuse me. Thank you for checking out episode number. Do you remember what Grandpa asked you?
I know he thought that I was the valedictorian of my high school class, which I wasn't. That's a lovely selective memory.
Come on, mate.
Good. We've been interviewing this whole time, actually. All this has been recorded.
Oh, great.
Yeah. There's a lot of good material for outtakes.
Oh.
And we're done. Very nice. Good stuff. Yeah, good.